Morning.
Morning, mate.
Wait a minute. Aren't you Annabelle, the doll from...
The Conjuring movies?
No, the Allswell ads.
Right. That side hustle.
Love the hoodie. Where did you get it?
From the Afraid of Nothing podcast store at aonpodcaststore.com. You can find all sorts of scary good merch there.
Wait, did I just step into a commercial?
No, this is an intro. Oh, and be sure to watch the Afraid of Nothing documentary on Amazon Prime and VidiSpace.
Since we're pitching, I suppose you're listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast on those headsets, right?
Nah, mate, I'm listening to Jim Harold's Campfire. Frightfully good podcast. And then I'll listen to the Paranormal podcast. Keeps me up all night.
Hey, how much is this Jim Harold guy paying you?
Gotta go.
Hey, lady, put a mask on.
Oi! I'm a doll, mate!
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
All right, we're here with Jim Harold. Hey, Jim, thanks for being with me again. I've actually had the pleasure of being on your show a couple times in the past. And here's a number for our audience to get their heads around. 40 million downloads. That's insane. The number of downloads that you have and how many people across the world listen to your shows. It's incredible. So you want to just kind of introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us kind of the genesis, how all this started?
Oh, absolutely. And Robert, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it. You can see I'm so used to having other people on my show. I was going to say thank you for joining us today. But the thing about 40 million, I'll just say this real quickly. 40 million downloads, it sounds great, and I'm very thankful for every one of those. But then I look at Joe Rogan and I say, not that big of a deal. But anyway, my name's Jim Harold. I've been a podcaster since 2005. Primarily focusing on the supernatural. It could be UFOs, it could be ghosts, it could be cryptid creatures and shadow people, all kinds of things, and my favorite, head scratchers. And essentially, I have two main shows that might be of interest to this audience, the Paranormal Podcast, which I started in 2005, and Jim Harold's Campfire, which is my most popular show, and that's people's real stories of the supernatural. That started in 2009. You had asked, the genesis was, I was a frustrated broadcaster. I had gone to school for broadcasting, mainly television. Although if somebody sees a picture of me, they would wonder, why, Jim? Why? But anyway.
Same for me, trust me.
But I have a face for radio. But the point being that I had ended up working in media, but on the business side. And I had been doing that for about a dozen years. I looked up in 2005 and I said, oh, so much for that dream of being a broadcaster. And then I heard about this thing called podcasting. And I heard some of the great pros that were radio people doing. I was like, oh, gosh, I can't compete with that. But then I heard some of the homemade ones. And in 2005, they were pretty rough. So I said, you know what? I'll give this a try. Nobody knew what it was. But strangely enough, people interested in the paranormal and the supernatural started to find me. And I dabbled for 2 or 3 years. Then I got more serious around 2008. And I just told my wife I'm going to really go at this seriously in 2008, and I did. And within several months, we had our first sponsors, and then things started to grow and grow and grow. And I started my Plus Club with my Plus shows. And by 2012, I was able to quit my day job and have been doing this full time for, well, next month will be 8 years. So it's been a blessing. I'm very lucky to do this. I love the topics. I'm still fascinated by it. The reason I picked the paranormal is I remember as a little kid, and you've probably heard me say this many times on the show, In Search Of by Leonard Nimoy started me out when I was in elementary school, watching him on TV and that show and all those mysteries. And I've just tried to continue, in that spirit, always interested in these topics. And I'm still fascinated to this day. So this is the ideal job for me. It combines my love of broadcasting, my love of tech, and my love of the supernatural. And it's kind of all together. So I'm a very blessed person, very thankful to my audience.
Oh, that's great. And let's start the show off with a plug anyway. So let's talk about all your shows. So just tell us right now, and we'll revisit it at the end. But where can people find you for your different podcasts? Because there are, like you said, there are 2 main shows, but others as well.
Yes, you can find all of my shows on all of the major podcast Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. Just type in Jim Harold, that's Harold, and they'll all pop up. And you can also find my main hub of activity at jimharold.com. Also, I would recommend that people check out our virtual campfire group on Facebook. That's virtualcampfiregroup.com. We just passed 20,000 members in that group, and that's where people share their spooky stories. And that's been great because that's all user generated. It's basically people coming in and saying, this weird thing happened to me. I took this weird picture, this weird video, and we have some great admins over there. So we keep everybody friendly, and we've got great members. And if we get somebody who's not so nice, we just kick them out. That's been great to have a group that big and have the great spirit we have over there. And also I'm doing more and more in video live streaming now, tempting fate. And I have a new thing called Jim Harold's Paranormal Quiz, which is a paranormal game show.
Wow.
And you can check that out on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jim Harold. We did the first one last week. We're doing one this week. Just trying to do some different stuff with the current situation, everything going on, trying to provide some more entertainment, information, diversion, call it whatever you want, and trying to just, on this side, always trying to think of new things. We have other shows that I've done in the past. My main other shows are in my Plus Club. That's jimharoldplus.com. And that's if somebody really loves the shows and they really want to do a deep dive. There's something like, I think it's almost 2,000 episodes there, various shows. And we have some exclusive Plus Club podcasts or shows. But really, the place to start is the Paranormal Podcast and Campfire. That's really the meat of what we do.
Yeah. And it's great quality content, too. I want to give you a perspective from a listener from following your show. I started actually in 2005, and I fell in love with your show because I couldn't at that point, I don't even think Ghost Adventures was out yet. I mean, Art Bell was certainly on the airwaves, but I don't think Ghost Adventures started until maybe a year or so after you and that whole rush of paranormal shows.
Right.
So there was this drought of paranormal content, and I used to just devour your paranormal podcast, just looking forward. I mean, you couldn't get enough shows out for me. And I want to tell you that you affected me in 3 ways. I told you, I'd mentioned this, but I didn't tell you what they were offline. But the first was when I listened to your show, the first time I said, I would love to be a guest on Jim's show sometime. And I actually had the pleasure. I did, it's like back 2012 was supposed to be the end of the world. And I did I did a graphic novel, and you had me on to talk about it with a panel discussion in 2009. And then when the world didn't end, we came back in 2012, and talked about it. And I was on again for something else. The second thing was, you don't know this, but you had kind of probably not one of your most notable episodes, but you had a guy on that claimed to know the world's oldest man. And I don't know much about it. But that show, I don't know if you know, I made a movie called Blessed about 5-6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And Blessed was about a woman who's like depressed in a bad marriage, kind of suicidal. And this guy moves across the street and she finds out that he's an immortal. So that immortal character was really kind of the seed that put that on my head, was that episode where I thought, this is fascinating. What if a woman who struggles day to day meets a man who's lived forever? And so that episode, I know you've had a lot of other shows, more notable guests, but that one episode was one of the biggest things I did in my life in terms of going out and making a movie and getting it out and distributed and all that, which was crazy. And the third thing was podcasting. I didn't even think about doing a podcast until I finished a documentary called Afraid of Nothing, which you and Clayton Morris are in. There's a clip we have from that show.
Right.
You were gracious enough to let me use it. After I made that podcast, I didn't have the funds to do another film, but I realized podcasting was much lower investment, but I could still follow my passion on the paranormal. So I did that. So I'm sure I'm just one example, but that's one example of one listener out of your 40 million downloads that you've affected in 3 aspects of their life. So thank you. I mean, it's just really what you've done really kind of affects people.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think that podcasters need to know that it's not just me, because I could say the same thing about 2 people. Adam Curry, who was an MTV, for those of us old enough to remember, MTV VJ, who ended up becoming an entrepreneur and ended up co-inventing podcasting. And then I listened to his show very early on. It was called Daily Source Code, and that was one of the inspirations to start doing something. And the other one was Leo Laporte, the great tech journalist who has gone on to, in 2005, he created his own network of tech podcasts and video casts. And I've modeled a lot of what I've done on what he did. Only thing, I talk about ghosts, not bits and bytes. So the same thing that you said about me, which is very kind, and thank you, I could say about other people. And certainly you mentioned Art Bell. I think anybody who does this is kind of like anybody who hosts a late night show pretty much these days has a debt of gratitude to Johnny Carson. Now, I'm not comparing myself to any of those people, but I think anybody who hosts a paranormal podcast really owes a debt of gratitude to people like Art Bell, Ian Punnett, George Norrie. So, because we're basically doing radio. Yeah, there's some differences. You don't have a broadcast clock. You may or may not have sponsors, but there's certainly that lineage there from radio. So, and then you could go back to Long John Nebel at WOR, like in the late 60s and early 70s, who did paranormal topics. So we all stand on the shoulders of other people. So I'm glad that had that impact on you. And that is something I would tell podcasters, is that when you do this, even if you have a new show or a relatively modest audience, you don't know who you're reaching. So you have a responsibility. For example, in the current instance with this COVID situation, I've been very clear. We speculate about a lot of things on these shows, but let's not speculate about this and go to the CDC site. I had somebody from the CDC write me and thank me for mentioning that. I mean, you never know who's listening. And I think people who have broadcast training kind of get that, because you were told basically every mic is live is one thing. And the other thing is that when you broadcast, you have to realize there's a public responsibility there, because you get your license through the FCC and so forth. Podcasters, I worry sometimes, not you, Robert, but some podcasters who are just starting out don't get that, these mics have power. And even if you're reaching 100 people, well, 100 people could do a lot of bad stuff, or they could do a lot of good stuff. So I think if you're going to crack a mic and hit record and release it as a podcast, be responsible, because it's important. You have power. It could be, power of just, reaching 10 or 20 people. It could be power like me, who might reach tens of thousands of people, or it might be power like Joe Rogan, who reaches millions of people each episode. But regardless, I think we have a responsibility now. I know that's a tangent, but I think that's an important thing to think about.
No, I think it's great. And also, I just wanted to mention the positive unintended consequences that people like you don't even know in terms of affecting people, because I know every once in a while you get the haters that just ruin your day, and you don't, hear all the positive stuff that you have that you impact people. So it's good to kind of keep focused on that. Yeah, and I would say one other thing that you impacted me before we dive into the paranormal was how you treat your guests. You have, and it kind of affected me when I did my documentary too. You are kind of, you engage people and you're interactive, but you're also a very good listener. So I tried to do that on my documentary, Afraid of Nothing, where I took a back seat and let people tell their own stories within it. And I try to do that with my guests too, because I have them on, it's their time, and I want to learn about them versus impose my thoughts too heavily handed into it. So that was another thing. I think it was a little subconscious that I learned it from you. When I was listening to you recently on the Speakeasy with Jeff Belanger, there was you and another gentleman. I was listening, and it kind of came up about how you treat people and your responsibility on the airwaves. And that occurred to me when I was listening to that.
Oh, thank you. And the thing I would say about that is one thing that's a little different than radio. Radio, just by virtue of the way it's set up, and you have something called a broadcast clock that you have to adhere to. So you have very tight time constraints for commercials and so forth, and weather and traffic or whatever it might be. You can't be quite as polite. You got to butt in more. But for podcasting, I mean, within a few parameters, you can let people go pretty freeform. And my thought has always been, people were tuning in for me and just wanted to hear me. Well, I wouldn't even have a guest. I would just open up the mic and record and just go stream of consciousness. But I don't believe that that's why people are tuning in. They're tuning in to hear the stories. They're hearing the experts and so forth. And maybe I help facilitate that. But as you said, I think the primary attraction is the guest. So I like to let the guest have their say. And to that point, I have had people with some wild theories on the shows. Now, just because I have somebody on the show does not necessarily mean I agree with their theory. I'm talking about the Paranormal Podcast where I do interviews of authors and experts. But my deal is this. As long as they're not spewing anything hateful, and I have shut down interviews that I've never aired because of that. But as long as they're not putting anything destructive or hate speech or anything like that out, I say let them have their say and let the audience decide. Now, I may pose a, quote, skeptical question here or there. Certainly not on Campfire, though. I'm very accepting on Campfire because those are regular folks who have just had experiences. So I don't challenge them. I like to be very accepting on that show. Paranormal Podcast, I may ask a sharp question here or there, but I don't get into this combative situation where somebody says something and I go back and say, oh, that's not possible. It's like, okay, well, let's go with this thought experiment that what you say is possible, and let's run with it.
Yeah. To me, it's like open up a bottle of wine and let it breathe,
Yep.
Let it get out there into the world. So, Jim, so you have two shows, the Paranormal Podcast and the Jim Harold Campfire. Being a host for 15 years or so of a podcast, you've probably heard it all. Are there a couple Campfire stories that come to mind that you just had never heard before and that totally stuck with you after you were done listening to it?
Well, this one's a little lengthy, but the one that comes foremost to mind is the Roadhouse Saloon. If you want me to, I can try to, as briefly as possible, retell that one. But this is basically...
Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, this is worthy of a Twilight Zone episode. So this focuses around our listener, T.I., who was calling in from Michigan, and she told a story about when she was in Wisconsin, and her and a male friend went to see a band. It was in a rural area. It was at a bar, and they went to see him. They closed down the place, and they were talking to the band afterwards because they were musicians as well. And they started to go back to their home area, which was about an hour away. T.I., my caller, she told her friend Bob, she said, I've got to go to the restroom. And he kind of looked around as they're driving and said, well, unless you want to avail yourself of one of these bushes, you're going to have to wait. And she said, no, just drive fast. So all of a sudden, maybe 10, 15 minutes down the road, they see this bar, wide open, neon signs, cars in a parking lot. You could even kind of hear the music. The joint was jumping, as they say, and it had a sign called the Roadhouse Saloon. So they went and they said, well, that's weird. It would be open now, but let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. We'll go in. And Bob had mentioned, actually, I'd love to go in this place. Never been there. I heard about this great Old West mural that had been created and is well known. And he was an artist as well. So he was curious about that. So they went in and everybody was kind of like not talking, but they were kind of smiling at them. They kind of got a weird vibe, but they thought, oh, well, whatever. So Bob goes and gets them both one drink from the bar, beer, and T.I. goes to take care of the call of nature. And Bob is admiring this huge Old West mural. And they're sitting there drinking and basically if you do by the way, folks, one of the hazards of this is when the neighbor dog walks by working out of a home studio. So if you hear a dog bleeding and just know that the neighbor's dog is walking by. Anyhow, so continuing on with the story. So they were looking around and the people were kind of weird, were kind of strange. They just kind of been smiling and kind of just strange. And they looked around, they saw this mural, and they noticed that the people in the mural were the same people in the bar. They thought, that's weird. God. And they're talking to each other and say, well, maybe these are regulars, right? And the artist did this as like an homage to them. So then comes up this guy, and they have this old jukebox, this Wurlitzer style jukebox that plays actual records, you know, the bubbler type, you know what I'm talking about, probably.
Yep.
He puts on Chubby Checker's Let's Twist Again. And he asks T.I. to dance, and T.I., you know, had no interest. This guy was kind of gnarly looking. He had kind of rotten teeth. It was not a good look. And she had a cane, and she showed it to him, and she said she was really happy because she walks with a cane. She was really happy she had that cane because that gave her excuse to say no. So anyway, they continue to talk and admire and realize that these people are kind of strange, but hey, you know what, whatever. And they're looking at the mural, and they notice the double doors, the swinging doors, like in the old TV Westerns. Where's Bart? Where's the sheriff? I want to see him. I want to have a showdown. You know, when he comes through the saloon doors.
Yeah.
And they had noticed before they were just the doors there, but they looked at it again, and they noticed they were what looked like some misty figures coming into view. And they thought, that was weird. That wasn't there a minute ago. And they noticed that one is a tall man, and one appears to be a shorter woman. And it's starting to develop in as like a Polaroid picture. And more definition. Yeah. The woman has curly hair. T.I. has curly hair. And the male is much taller. Bob is much taller than T.I. And then develops a little more, and they notice that the woman has boots. T.I. has boots on. Then they notice the woman has a cane. And at that point, Bob and T.I. look at each other and say, let's get out of here.
Oh, God.
We don't know what happened.
Doppelgangers. Yeah.
So anyway, they go out, they close the door, and the whole place goes black.
Oh,
like it was dead stone cold. And they turn around and look at the parking lot, and there is a car, a singular car in the parking lot, their car. So they drive off, and you would think, boy, that's a wild story. But it even gets wilder because T.I. is a very brave person. And she decides to come back a couple days later with her sister, I think it was, or a friend. They go about 7, 8 o'clock at night. They weren't going to chance it at 1 or 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning like this happened. And they go in, and sure enough, the mural is there, and there's a jukebox. But the jukebox is a modern CD jukebox. And, oh, by the way, no Chubby Checker. They go and talk to the bartender, who's a woman. T.I. says, you know, the other night there was this big, burly, good-looking bartender in here. Where's he at? And she's like, we don't have any bartender like that in here. All we have is myself and my elderly father. And with that, T.I. figured she wasn't going to figure it out. She left. She never came back again to the Roadhouse Saloon. And I got to say, maybe if they had stayed there when they saw that misty figure, who knows? Maybe they would have gotten trapped. And here is the kicker. The kicker to that even is this place really exists. Listeners have gone and they've taken pictures. The mural exists. It is a real place. So while I've talked to T.I. at length on multiple occasions, she seems very sincere. Her story doesn't change, and the place is real. And that's what I can tell you about the Roadhouse Saloon. That's my favorite all-time campfire story.
That's incredible. That sounds like a time slip, doesn't it? Sounds kind of like they kind of, yeah.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, it is just weird. It is just very, very strange. And the part I didn't mention is they were leaving. The people were kind of almost beckoning them back. There's a lot of detail in this story if you listen to the original. And it was like, why were they beckoning them back? Did they want them to join them in like this time loop or whatever it was?
Since you regaled us with one great story, is there another one too? That'll whet people's appetites to go check out more.
Well, one, now this isn't necessarily my all-time favorite, but one that sticks out that happened last year. And I've got to remember it exactly. This is off the top of my head. This gentleman had his phone and he was watching TV. Let's call him David. And doesn't recognize the number, but he picks up the number and the guy, somebody's on the other end. He's like, hi, can I help you? And it's like, hi, David. I just wanted to see how you were doing. well, I'm doing fine. He said, yeah, well, and he doesn't recognize this voice, just a very gentle, calm, nice voice. And he said, well, I just hadn't heard from you in a while. I wanted to make sure that you're doing all right. And he said, yeah, I'm doing fine. He said, may I ask who this is? And the caller says, well, this is Jesus.
Oh.
You're going to be coming to see me soon, and I just wanted to make sure you were okay. And he said, okay, well, thank you very much. And he thought it was, and you have a nice day. And he thought somebody was pulling his leg. So anyway, like the next day or two, this guy has a massive heart attack, and he almost dies. And he comes out of it. And that was so eerie to me, is like, I'm Jesus. You're going to be coming to see me soon. I'm going to be seeing you soon. It's like, oh my gosh. It's like, I mean, again, he didn't die, at least as of this recording, which was last year. You know, he said he had a lot of health crises, but he made it through okay. But the thing is, could you imagine getting a call from someone and he was never able to figure it out? I can't remember if the phone didn't display the number. He couldn't figure the number out, but could never figure out who it was. It wasn't anybody he knew. He was certain of that. To have somebody call you, say, I'm Jesus, I'm going to be seeing you soon. And then the next day you almost die.
Yeah, that's
freaky. And those are, and Bob, I want to say this because when people think about Campfire, they think about ghost stories. And certainly we have those. But some of the coolest stories are kind of the things that defy one of these categories we usually think about. That what I call the head scratchers. And I think those are my favorite ones because they're things that, you know, as you said, I mean, I've been doing Campfire since 2009, and I've probably, you know, I think there's 450 episodes or something of that. I'll have to look. And you figure on the early shows, I was only doing a half hour, but let's say an average of 5 stories a show. Well, I've heard well over a couple thousand stories, and you think you've heard it all. And then somebody comes across, this was just late last year, and somebody comes across with something like that, and you go, wow, I haven't heard it all.
Hello, listeners. I want to play a game. But first, a disturbing interruption to our podcast.
Whoa, you must be the new roommate. What's your name?
Annabelle.
Hi, Annabelle. What are you doing on my Allswell mattress?
I need to possess it.
Yeah, hey, look, I get it. Allswell mattresses are the best. Its hybrid mattress technology gives you the comfort of memory foam with the support of individually wrapped coils, all at a really great price.
Allswell.
Yeah, you got it. You can even try it for 100 nights, risk-free. And if you're not satisfied with the sleep that you're getting, simply ship it back. Plus, every Allswell mattress comes with a 10-year limited warranty. So if you ever have any problems, you don't have to worry about being stuck in bed hell. There's only one problem. You need to get your own. Oh, and you get free shipping on your first Allswell mattress simply by following the link in the show notes. It helps support the podcast.
Never be afraid of a good night's sleep.
All's well.
And now, back to our horrific program.
I was going to say, I was wondering if a lot of these stories are iterations of we're in a summer cabin and this weird stuff was happening, or we're in the woods and we thought we saw a Bigfoot. I mean, if there's kind of like those are the mainstream, but do you still get a pretty fresh assortment? I mean, those seem like gems that come up every once in a while, but do you get a pretty fresh assortment still?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got to tell you, all the time. I just had a caller from India. It's going to be on this week's show. And she had this story about a home that her family was living in that just had this string of tragedy associated with it. And somebody else moved in and they had similar instances. So it seems like almost every week I have like one like blow you away story.
Oh, that's great.
And then you'll have some stories that are good, but they may not be up to that level. But I mean, almost every week I have one like, whoa.
That's awesome.
What was that?
We should also.
So, yeah. And the thing.
I was going to say, we should also mention that you have how many books out? 5 or so books on your Campfire story?
Yes, I almost forget about that. Yeah, based on the Campfire, I have 5 books out. I'm working on a 6th. I'm hoping to get that out by Halloween time. And they're basically compendiums of the best stories of Campfire. So each one will have something like 70 stories in it. I really try to jam pack them full. And Jim Harold's Campfire, you look it up on Amazon, it'll come up, and pretty much all of them have probably on average 4.5 out of 5-star average reviews. So people seem to like them. People listen to the show certainly like them. If you like kind of short, spooky stories, it's great because it's a great bathroom reader. I don't want to be too disgusting, but I mean something where you could just pick it up, whether it's on your Kindle or it's actual paperback. When we could go to a doctor's office, you could go to a doctor's office and read 2 or 3 stories. I used to actually do that as a form of guerrilla marketing. I would take the books and just pay for them and just stick them in doctor's offices when I go. And I put a stamp on about my podcast. But the thing was that way, I figure if people read one, and then one time I remember I took one and I was there 20 minutes and somebody literally stole the book.
Yeah, flattery.
I'm like, okay, well, maybe you'll buy more. Maybe you'll subscribe to the podcast. Also, my mechanic, I give him copies and have them. He's like, you'd be surprised how many people ask me about these books.
Those are I love anthologies, Jim. I love kind of the short, quick reads, things like that. So those are great.
Yep.
Have you ever thought of having audiobooks of these at some point, or where someone reads them? Or?
Yeah. Audiobooks are, you have to be, it's not like a podcast. You can get away with some stuff on a podcast, not perfect sound quality or your dog barking in the background or whatever. Audiobooks is very meticulous. I've thought about it for a long time. I probably need to get on that. But then again, I think, well, wait a minute. The podcast is the audio version, but it would be different if I read those or had actors read them. So it's something I've considered. I just, being a one-man media company, although I must say I have a great virtual assistant who works with me. I have someone who actually, at this point, I have someone that listens to each show before they go out to make sure there's no mistakes. And I have an editor who helps out. So, I've broadened my network of my team of people who are helping me, but at the genesis, anything that happens has to go through me. So adding new things is sometimes tough, but that's certainly something I should do.
No, I think it would be great. You still have the True Crimes and the TV show one too?
Well, they're both there and you can listen to them. I think they're both good shows. When you're a small media company, what you have to do is you take a look at projects, and depending on the response you get, you continue with some things and you don't continue with others. So the Great TV podcast, which is still up and you can still listen to, there's 30 some episodes of that, and it's great evergreen content. I got to talk to Don Wells, who played Marianne on Gilligan's Island. That had nothing to do with the supernatural. Ed Asner from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Donnie Most, who played Ralph Malph on Happy Days. I love the concept of the show talking to these actors who have been in these iconic television series. It just didn't seem to catch. I think maybe, Bob, I think my issue is I'm so identified with the paranormal. That's what people want to hear from me. Yeah. So, sometimes it's better to swim with the stream than against it. Yeah. So on the Great TV podcast, we sunset that a few years ago, but it's still available and it's still great content if you love those kind of shows. I think it's a great show. Same with the crime scene. I did that originally as a premium offering, and then I opened it up for free. There's 192 episodes of that. I did True Crime before True Crime was a fad. Yeah. But it just never got to the level of the other shows, which was really kind of disheartening because I did serious interviews with true crime authors and people listened to the show, loved it, but it never grew. It just never grew. So, I mean, with any of these projects, kind of the way that I view them is they're experiments. Yeah. Sometimes experiments for 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. Sometimes the experiment might be for a year. And then if it doesn't catch, I still leave the archives out there because there's still good evergreen content. And, oh, by the way, I never rule out picking up something once again. Like I might say next year, you know what? A Great TV podcast, that was a great idea. Let's put some more energy into it and let's try it again. So I don't view those as failures. I view those as content that people can listen to and enjoy, hopefully for years to come. I just got an email yesterday. Somebody said, hey, are you going to do any more editions of the crime scene? And it's like, well, not at this point, but there's 192 of them you can listen to whenever you'd like.
Well, you've been kind of a little bit ahead of your time, and you were able to nurture the paranormal podcast for a while. What was your first, I'm sure you remember, what was your first guest or your first episode on the paranormal podcast? And were you happy with it when it was done?
My first guest was Lloyd Auerbach, I believe.
Yes. He's been on like a bunch of times, right?
Yeah, he's fantastic. I think he goes by the moniker sometimes, Professor Paranormal. And he's one of those people who knows more than, or he's forgotten more than I'll ever know about this stuff. And I think I'm smart enough to know I'm not an expert in this stuff. I'm just the guy that asks the questions. I never present myself as an expert. But Lloyd Auerbach was first, who was tremendous. And then the second show was the legendary UFO researcher Stanton Friedman, who just passed last week, who basically put Roswell on the map.
Oh, yeah.
In both of those cases, what tremendous guests. I think the first question was kind of like, we're on a pod, what?
Yeah.
2005, nobody knew what they were. And maybe that's why I got such great guests out of the gate, and there was no competition, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was no other podcast. I mean, Gene Steinberg had the Paracast. I think that predated mine by a little bit, maybe. And I know Anything Ghost. I don't know if Anything Ghost was before 05, though. I think it was definitely before Campfire. I'll say this. There were some shows. There were only one or two that were up to even the production standard back then. You asked me if I was happy about it. Certainly as a first episode, looking back with the equipment that was available, I leave that up, and it's still decent content. Now, I could pick that apart in terms of its audio. I could pick it apart in terms of the questioning and stuff, so forth. But for 2005, when nobody had any guidance on how to do this stuff, it still holds up, I think.
Yeah.
Now, if I heard that show now, I'd be sickened. But now
maybe not. I love that first year. It was a great. There was some really great stuff.
Yeah, but I also think it's funny. I was in my 30s, but I sound like I'm 5 years. I'm like, hey, I just.
Everybody hates their voice. Every time I interview someone, they're always nervous about listening to their voice, and then it's I think it's just a universal thing. People think, oh, my voice is annoying, but it's really not. So a question for you on your paranormal podcast, of all the topics you've covered, and I'll tell you what, one of my favorite ones was Black-Eyed Children. That was came out of left field for me. Was there something like that came over the course of your 15 years, like 2 or 3 things that came out that a guest brought to you that you weren't aware of and that kind of blew your mind a little bit?
The thing that freaks me out the most that we've talked about is the idea of the jinn. And if you're familiar with the concept of genies, basically the idea of the lore of the genie came from the jinn. And it's kind of like these trickster entities that come from kind of Middle Eastern culture. I was introduced to the concept by the late, great Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who had been on my show literally 20 times over the years and became a friend. And we lost her too last year, and that was a loss. She was fantastic. But anyway, she told me about the jinn. Now, I will tell a story about this, and this could be sheer coincidence. But back in 2013, it would have been, I was interviewing her, and my uncle, and this is almost a topic I hate to even verbalize because it kind of freaks me out. My uncle had been sick, and he was in pretty serious condition, but nobody thought anything was going to happen quickly. This was would have been early April of 2013. And she had sent me a book on the jinn. And we did an interview on the jinn. And later that night, my uncle died. Now, again, he was sick. This wasn't like he got hit by a car or something unexpected. He was sick, but I don't think any of us thought that he was on the road to death. We thought that, he's got a struggle and in a few months, he might make it, he might not, but there was no reason to think he was going to die that day. And then within 2 weeks, my mom died unexpectedly, totally unexpectedly. And this uncle wasn't just like your garden variety uncle. He was like a second dad to me. Very
Yeah.
important in my life.
Yeah.
So, the combo of those two, there's certain authors, I get sent a lot of books, which is very nice. And many of the books I'll pass along to other people simply because I don't have room. But there are a few authors that I keep every single one of their books. Rosemary is one of those. She would always send me her books and I would always keep them. Brad Steiger, the same way.
Yep.
Jeff Belanger, the same way. Marie D. Jones. Certain Nick Redfern, I keep their books. I'm like, hey, this is mine. I'm keeping that. So anyway, Rosemary's book on the gin, I threw it in the garbage. Just in case, you never know. I didn't want to tempt fate.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
It's one of those things where the gin freaks me out. And the thing is that if you look at the gin, one of the things they're known for is being a shapeshifter.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that it's true. They could account for a whole range of different paranormal activity. You mentioned the black-eyed kids.
Yep.
Well, the black-eyed kids could be jinn. Shadow people, that could be jinn. So if you really look into it, it's really a terrifying thing. And I'm kind of afraid to even talk about it during this time with this coronavirus going around. I don't want to tempt fate.
Yeah.
But it's a freaky topic to me. So that's one that really impacted me.
Now, one that I liked, have you ever had anyone on the couple of topics I'm curious if you ever had? One is like sleep paralysis. One of my favorite documentaries is called The Nightmare. I don't know if you ever saw that, where people have suffered sleep paralysis and they see shadow figures. Have you ever had anyone that topic on your show or?
Yes. We actually did something with Lex Liebengood, who also is like the webmaster for Coast to Coast AM and had a book out on nightmares. We've done a couple things on sleep paralysis. That's a tough one for me because, to me, obviously, there are cases that can be biologically explained. Yeah. Sleep apnea, you don't sleep well, you wear CPAP, you have these things. So I think sleep paralysis can be just a medical thing, right?
Yeah.
But I also wonder and think if it can be also a supernatural thing. And that's where it gets tough because I don't put myself, Bob, in the true believer camp. Like, I don't necessarily believe everything is a ghost or an alien.
Yep.
On the other hand, I'm not one of those people that say, oh, it's all a bunch of BS. I'm in what I consider the reasonable middle. I can say, yeah, those Tic Tac videos that we're finding out from the military, boy, it sure looks like there's something there. And hey, it might be ET. It might be.
Yeah.
And I'm perfectly willing to accept that. But I'm also perfectly willing to accept that sometimes people dress up in hairy man suits and pretend to be Bigfoot. Yep. I think both things can be true. You don't have to be one. So sleep paralysis is one I struggle with because I think, well, is it strictly medical? And are people having hallucinations? Or could it be that both things are true? Yeah, sometimes it's strictly medical, or sometimes it's much more.
Another one I heard from another interview I had was about mirrors in the bedroom. Don't have mirrors in your bedroom facing your bed.
I've heard that. And the thing is we've had a couple of wild mirror stories on the Campfire, specifically dealing with mirrors. And you had asked earlier stories that really hit with me. And one of my favorites is this guy from Los Angeles went to an estate sale. And I won't give the full story, but essentially he ended up with this old antique mirror that was kind of thrown in with some other stuff he bought. So he brought the mirror to the house. It's like this big, huge old leaden mirror, like the old lead mirrors, had it up in a bedroom, and a bunch of strange stuff started happening in the house. And one day he's asleep on the couch, or asleep in that room, I think. And he wakes up and the room is full of people. And it's like these people at a party and they're dancing.
Oh,
it's like, what in the world is he? He's like rubbing his eyes. And the one guy walks up to him and he says, well, who are you? Who are all these people in my bedroom? And he said, we came with the mirror.
Oh God.
And then wait till what he says. He said, we like to dance. We didn't get to finish our last dance. That's where you come in.
Oh my God. Oh God.
And then all this weird stuff happened. But that was the weirdest. But we've had a couple of like classic Campfire stories that have to do with mirrors. So that's, I haven't done a show on that. Now, also, something I talked to Rosemary about and some other people about over the years is the idea of the psychomantium and the idea of like scrying and looking into a black mirror. So there seems to be something potentially very spiritual with mirrors. I don't know what it is, but there seems to be some weirdness on multiple levels.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some expert out there on that who could reach out and get in the show.
I really ought to reach out. I did one years ago on scrying, which is fascinating. This idea that you can see spirits by looking in a black mirror.
Yeah.
And I think I actually had a black mirror and it kind of freaked me out and I got rid of it. And I'm like, why'd I do that? But they sent it to me as a promotion for this book. This is like, before I went full time, and I think I passed it along and I'm like, man, I wish I would have kept that. But because maybe I'm a little more adventurous now. Nevertheless, I ought to revisit it. Because that's something that has always fascinated me, this idea of you can use a mirror, a black mirror, to contact the other world, although who knows what you open up.
Yeah. And look, I know we're near the end. I want to respect your time, but just a couple closing questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What is on your philosophy of the paranormal? I know I've heard you say before, the more you've been exposed to it, the less you seem to know because there's so many different takes and different possibilities. But what is your philosophy on the paranormal in terms of, and do you think like quantum mechanics and science kind of intertwine with it? What's your philosophy on that?
Oh, I sure do. I think that along with that idea of I have more questions than when I start, because boy, when I started in 2005, I thought this will be great. I'll do this for 6 months and I'll have the answers. No, not so much.
Yeah.
More questions now than I had then. I'm more convinced than ever that there is another side of life, that there is a supernatural side of life. On the other hand, I'm less convinced of what that specifically is. I do think kind of what you hinted at. I think that we really have a very limited knowledge of reality and that we don't fully get it. And we're like, we're looking at shadows on a wall trying to interpret this very sophisticated thing. And that's where I think, people are getting into science and they say, well, it doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, because we just our brains aren't equipped to handle it, I don't think. But I think there's an afterlife. I think that there's something to the ET hypothesis. Bigfoot, I don't know. The jury's still out on that one. I'm not convinced I could go either way on that one because there's some great accounts from some very reputable people, but I keep going back. Why haven't we found any DNA? Although people would say, well, it's an interdimensional being.
Yeah.
And that's why not. Who knows?
There's that whole, by the way, that Bigfoot thing, where people see not just this big hairy ape, but also a big hairy ape, dematerializing and disappearing in the forest and stuff.
Right. So again, I'm not a true believer on everything, but I definitely believe there's something going on. I think the vast majority of people that call Campfire are telling the truth as they know it. And they believe they've seen something. And I think in many cases they have seen something supernatural. What that is, I don't know. So my philosophy, I guess, if I distilled it down, is there's definitely something going on that's kind of extra normal. What it is, I can't tell you.
Have you ever lived in a haunted house, or as a family member ever lived in a haunted house that you know of?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Have you ever gone ghost hunting? I mean, you've interviewed a lot of people. Have you ever gone to like the Conjuring House or any Ohio has tons of great places. Have you ever gone to any places on your own?
I've only done little things associated with things like conferences and things. But honestly, I got to say, I kind of try to stay separate of that. And it sounds kind of weird. Well, why would you do that? Because a lot of people think, oh, you're a ghost hunter. It's like, I am most definitely not.
Yeah.
I kind of look at it as like, when you watch a football game, and you've got somebody announcing who was a player. I mean, that could be fantastic. You can have fantastic insight. But I also think there's a value to having somebody who was not a player, who can look at it from a distance and he's not in it. He's of it, but he's not in it. So I kind of like to hold myself apart. It's not just pure laziness. It's trying to keep myself a little bit apart from that so I can be a little bit more... it's why a newscaster doesn't become a politician, right? You want to have a little distance from the subject. So I think that served me well over the years. So that's almost, there's definitely some haunted sites I'd like to go tour just to see them. But in terms of going on active ghost hunts, strangely enough, that doesn't interest me that much.
No, fair enough. And I think I want to close with, how have you been doing during the whole COVID-19 kind of quarantine thing? Has it affected, I mean, you're a podcaster. You would think maybe it doesn't change too much, but how has it affected what you've been doing, and how is your life, and how's your family been?
Well, family's good. My oldest daughter came from the UK. She'd been studying abroad. She's going to be a senior next year in college. And thankfully, there were no ill effects from that travel. She came back in mid-March, and that was scary. But we started quarantining on March 13th, and we basically haven't stopped since. I've not been in another building other than my house since March 13th. So it makes you a little stir crazy, but it's true. Family is doing well. My youngest daughter is in high school. She's a junior in high school. She's doing the remote learning thing, and that's going well. I feel badly for her and her compatriots, but it is what it is, and we just all have to buck up and deal with it. My wife is an online speech therapist. She continues to do therapy online, although it has decreased her hours because a lot of the students don't have the resources, unfortunately. She works with some poorer districts, and they don't have the connectivity, and that's certainly something I think that we got to fix as a country.
Yep.
Everybody needs to have access, because we see now it's like electricity. You need internet. And then the final thing, for me, has been, I'm like anybody else. I'm worried about this situation. What does it mean for my family? What does it mean for my business? What does it mean for my fellow man and my country? I'm worried. I think we're all worried where this is going to go. Thankfully, my business and what I do has not been impacted terribly negatively. I mean, there was some quick downturn and things look like, this is all going to blow up. And then everything seemed to smooth out. There's a lot of uncertainty. Don't know what's going to happen, but right now we're keeping afloat and, just keeping going, and even launching a new project, that Paranormal Quiz, which I wanted to do something fun. I think people need something fun now, because we need a distraction from this. I mean, we definitely need to be informed, follow the authorities, do all that stuff. I don't say put your head in the sand, but also, for a few hours a week, I think we need to unplug and also distract ourselves a little bit. I mean, you think about the Second World War or the Great Depression. At that time, the movie houses did very well because people just wanted a couple hours of escape. So if I can provide people 1, 2, 3 hours of escape a week where they can think about something other than killer viruses, then I'm doing my job.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, because that's another thing people don't realize. The unintended positive consequences that they have with people is giving them a diversion from watching the daily news briefs and kind of getting mixed messages from all the different types of media. So let's give another plug on your quiz where people can kind of, partake in that, and also final closure on plugs on your different podcasts and where people can find out more about you and listen to you.
You can find the new Paranormal Quiz at youtube.com/Jim Harold. That's my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. And also they can find all my podcasts on all the major podcast apps: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher. Basically, if it's a podcast app, I'm in there. They can just search for Jim Harold, Harold, and they can also go to jimharold.com. And Robert, thank you so much for this opportunity. I wish you the best with the podcast. It was so good to spend some time with you and your audience today.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, Jim. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared. Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout-out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.